This video is introducing different types of subordinate clauses. Now let's have a look at some examples of subordination. He thought that I would leave. I ate because I was hungry. The girl that moved in next door seems nice. My cat, who usually doesn't say much, meowed because she wanted me to stroke her. You can see it can get quite complicated. And at the end of this video, we'll be able to analyze these types of subordinate clauses and see what different types there are. But before we go there, let's just have a quick look at what subordination really is. Now, when we talk about subordination, we mean the linking of two or more clauses. And usually these clauses are at different levels. So you can have a main clause up here, and you can have a subordinate clause which is at a lower level. Now, when these clauses are linked, they're usually linked by subordinating conjunctions. And examples of these are that, which, while, because, and so on. We'll see a few of these later in our example sentences. We can also show subordination as elements appearing at different levels. So just as I did with my hands before, we would say the main clause is above and the subordinate clause is below. We can have the main clause, our X here, and the subordinate clause, our Y. Okay, so clauses at different levels. Right. We can also then look at the different components of these clauses. And the main clauses are usually called main clauses, but some people may use the terminology root clauses or matrix clauses. And then we've got subordinate clauses, which are also referred to as embedded clauses. And we've got our example again here. He thought that I would leave, which consists of the main clause, he thought something, and our subordinate clause, that I would leave, okay, which is introduced here by the subordinating conjunction. And when we want to present it in the same way that we did earlier with X and Y, we can say our main clause, he thought, is at the top, or he thought something, and our subordinate clause, that I would leave, is below. And it kind of appears below this line up here just because it appears in this part of where the object would be. He thought something, he thought it. What is it? Well, that I would leave. Okay, so the subordinate clause is part of the main clause, in a way. Okay, so now we can come to the different types of subordination. And there are three. And these are complement clauses, adverbial clauses, and relative clauses. And let's look at what they do. We'll come to this slide again at the end of the presentation, so hopefully if something seems pretty unclear now, it should be clearer at the end. So, when we start with complement clauses, we can say that this is a type of subordinate clause that is either the subject or the object of a main clause or a higher ranking clause. Then we've got adverbial clauses, and these are clauses that act as an adverbial, as an additional non-obligatory element in the main clause. And finally, our relative clauses, we can say that these are subordinate clauses that act as the modifier in a noun phrase, that tell us a little bit more about generally the head noun in a noun phrase. There's a little bit more to this, and that's why I put a little star there, but this is just a very simple introduction, so this will be enough for now. Right, so let's come to the different types of clauses, and let's start with complement clauses. Now, complement clauses, we had an example earlier. He thought that I would leave. And remember, complement clauses, we said, are clauses that appear as subject or object in the main clause. And in this case, that I would leave is the object of the main clause, he thought. So, he thought something is our main clause, and that I would leave is our object complement. It acts as the object of the main clause. And we can also have a clause where the complement clause, the subordinate clause, is the subject. So something or other is nice, he is nice, it is nice, the weather is nice, or working from home is nice. In this case, we have an entire clause that appears in the subject position. In this case, working from home. And this is a clause, we can tell it's a clause because it has a predicate, working. It appears with a verb. So working from home is the subject of our main clause. It is nice. And something is nice is our main clause. So another type of complement clause, in this case a subject complement clause. This means we can move on to adverbial clauses. Adverbial clauses are those clauses that add some extra information which doesn't necessarily have to be there. So an example of this is I ate because I was hungry. In this case we can just say I ate, and that's enough. That's a fully formed clause consisting of a subject and a predicate. But here we want to add some more information. We want to say, well, why did I eat? Well, because I was hungry. So what this adverbial clause does is it gives us more information about the main clause. So I ate is the main clause, I is the subject, ate the predicate. Because I was hungry is an adverbial clause with additional information, in this case reason for why I was eating. And we can have all sorts of different adverbial clauses. There are adverbial clauses of time, manner, and so on. So not just reason, but purpose, or when something happened, how something happened, why something happened. So I ate when I was hungry tells us something about the timing of my eating. Okay, I ate at the point of time when I was hungry. And this is introduced by the adverbial clause marker when, by our subordinating conjunction when. Okay, so in this case, again, I ate is our main clause, and it consists of a subject and a predicate. And we've got when I was hungry as our subordinate clause, giving additional or adverbial information. And in this case, the information is about time, the timing of my eating. This brings us to the last types of clauses, namely relative clauses. And there are different types of relative clauses. We'll just be looking at one particular type here. So, our example earlier was, the girl that moved in next door seems nice. Now, our main clause is really, the girl seems nice. But this doesn't really specify who that is. And in order to specify which girl we're talking about, we're using a relative clause. We're using that moved in next door. And what that moved in next door is doing is, it's telling us a little bit more about the girl. Okay, so we can say that moved in next door modifies the girl, tells us more about the girl, and it is a modifier in this noun phrase. And that's the function of the relative clause. Relative clauses, well, this is just one type, and there are many different types, and we can really classify in a variety of ways, and that's far beyond this video, but I hope that this general introduction to relative clauses is a first step towards the more complicated stuff. Right, so let's now take all subordinations together. And here comes our last example from earlier. My cat, who usually doesn't say much, meowed because she wanted me to stroke her. Now, in this example, we've got all three types of subordinations in one example. We've got our main clause, the cat meowed, or my cat meowed in this case. And we've got a relative clause, my cat, who usually doesn't say much. So what this who usually doesn't say much does is it tells us a little bit more about cat. Then our next subordination is an adverbial clause. Because she wanted something. Because she wanted it. Okay, this tells us a little bit more about why she meowed, but it doesn't really have to be there. It's an adverbial, it's some extra information. And it tells us something about the reason for why she was meowing. And then finally, we've got an object complement clause. Because she wanted something, this something is me to stroke her. So she wanted it. But what this me to stroke her does is it acts as an object in our adverbial clause, in a higher ranking clause above. So in this case, we've got all three examples all in one. Well, I hope this was useful as an introduction. Let me just go back to types of subordination, just to summarize. We've got complement clauses, and these are subordinate clauses that are either the subject or the object in the main clause. And we've got adverbial clauses, which add additional information, adjuncts in the main clause. And we've got relative clauses, which tell us a little bit more about a noun, so they act as modifiers in a noun phrase. And that's it. Thank you very much.